The glass door slammed open at 2:17 a.m., and Jerry Lee Lewis walked into the truck stop like a hurricane wearing leather. His shirt was unbuttoned to his sternum, his blonde hair wild, his eyes carrying that particular shine that came from 3 whiskeys and the unshakable belief that he was the most important person in any room he entered. Behind him, 2 musicians from his band followed nervously, trying to keep up with his energy. Jerry Lee's boots hit the linoleum floor like drum beats, announcing his arrival to the dozen tired truckers and late-night travelers scattered across the booths and counter stools. "Coffee!" Jerry Lee shouted at the waitress, his voice far too loud for the quiet space. "And make it strong enough to wake the dead, darling. The killer doesn't sleep." A few heads turned. Most didn't bother. This was a truck stop off Highway 40 in eastern Tennessee, and they'd seen loud drunks before. The waitress, a woman in her 50s named Carol, who'd been working the night shift for 15 years, barely looked up. "Coffee's on the counter," she said flatly. "Help yourself." Jerry Lee grinned, mistaking her indifference for sass he could play with. He strutted to the counter, poured himself a cup, and turned to survey his audience. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Rain tapped against the windows. The jukebox in the corner played something low and forgotten. And sitting in the back corner booth, nearly invisible in the shadows, a man in black sat alone with his coffee. But nobody in that truck stop was ready for what would happen in the next 8 minutes. Jerry Lee took his coffee and walked between the booths, making noise, craving attention. He was 37 years old in 1973, and his career had survived scandals that would have buried anyone else. He'd married his 13-year-old cousin and watched his career explode. He'd fought his way back through pure talent and unhinged performances. He'd destroyed pianos on stage, set them on fire, kicked over drum sets. He was chaos incarnate, and he wore it like a crown. "Any of you boys know who I am?" Jerry Lee asked the room, gesturing with his coffee cup. A trucker in a John Deere cap looked up from his pie. "Nope." "Jerry Lee Lewis," he announced, as if the name should make the room stand at attention. "The killer, Great Balls of Fire. Whole lot of shaking going on. I played with Elvis before Elvis was Elvis." The trucker nodded politely and went back to his pie. Jerry Lee's smile tightened. This wasn't playing out how he'd imagined. But then one of the musicians behind him whispered something, and Jerry Lee's head snapped toward the back corner booth. His eyes narrowed, adjusting to the shadows, and then his face lit up with recognition and something else. Competition. Sitting alone in that booth was Johnny Cash. Have you ever watched 2 legends occupy the same space and felt the air pressure change? Johnny sat with both hands wrapped around a white ceramic mug. His black shirt blended into the darkness of the booth. His face was weathered, tired, carrying the weight of 1,000 miles and 1,000 mistakes. He wasn't hiding. He simply existed in a way that didn't demand attention. His eyes were down, focused on the coffee, on his own thoughts, on whatever internal conversation kept him company at 2 a.m. on a Tennessee highway. He hadn't looked up when Jerry Lee entered, hadn't reacted to the noise. The room had shifted around Jerry Lee's energy, but Johnny remained perfectly still, like a stone in a river. Jerry Lee stared at him for a long moment. His band members shifted nervously. One of them whispered, "Jerry, maybe we should just—" "Cash!" Jerry Lee's voice cut through the truck stop like a whip crack. Johnny's eyes lifted slowly. No surprise registered on his face. No irritation. He simply looked at Jerry Lee the way you might look at weather you'd been expecting. Jerry Lee strutted toward the booth, his musicians trailing behind like apologetic shadows. Every step was performance, every movement designed to own the space. He slid into the booth across from Johnny without asking, his coffee sloshing slightly. "Well, well," Jerry Lee said, his grin sharp. "The man in black Sitting alone in a truck stop at 2 in the morning, that's some image, Cash. Real poetic. Johnny didn't respond immediately. He took a slow sip of his coffee, set the mug down carefully, and then his eyes met Jerry Lee's. Not challenging, not avoiding, just present. "Jerry Lee," Johnny said quietly. His voice was that familiar gravel but without any edges, just stating a fact. "Damn right," Jerry Lee leaned back, throwing his arm across the back of the booth like he owned it. "You know, I was just telling these boys about the old days. Sun Records, me, you, Elvis, Carl, Roy, back when we were all hungry, back before you got all—" He gestured at Johnny's dark clothes, his quiet presence. Serious. Johnny's expression didn't change. "I was always serious." "Nah," Jerry Lee shook his head, his smile getting wider, sharper. "You used to have fire in you, Cash. I remember. You used to be wild. What happened? You get old? You get soft?" The truck stop had gone quiet. Not obviously. Nobody was staring. But conversations had lowered. The waitress was pretending to wipe down the counter while listening. The trucker with the John Deere cap had stopped eating. Even the rain seemed to pause against the windows. But something was building in that booth. Something the whole room could feel without understanding. Johnny took another sip of coffee. When he spoke, his voice was the same quiet rasp, but every word carried weight. "I got tired, Jerry Lee. There's a difference." "Tired?" Jerry Lee laughed, too loud, performing for the room now. "The killer doesn't get tired. You know why they call me that? Because I kill every stage I walk onto, every night, every performance. I burn it all down and leave nothing but ashes. That's rock and roll, Cash. That's what we're supposed to be." Johnny's eyes stayed on Jerry Lee's face. Steady. Unmoving. "You think I'm not wild anymore?" Jerry Lee continued, his voice rising. "I'm the same cat I always was. Still drinking, still raising hell, still playing piano like the devil's on my shoulder. That's authenticity, Cash. That's real. Not this—" He gestured at Johnny again. "Whatever this quiet, brooding thing is you do now." One of Jerry Lee's band members put a hand on his shoulder. "Jerry, come on, man, let's just—" Jerry Lee shrugged him off. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Johnny Cash used to be somebody. Now he's just—" "What? A guy in black who sings sad songs? Where's the danger? Where's the edge?" The question hung in the air like smoke. And then Johnny spoke. "Jerry?" Just his name. But the way Johnny said it made Jerry Lee stop mid-thought. There was no anger in it, no defensiveness, just something immovable, like bedrock. Johnny leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, just present. His voice stayed quiet, but somehow it filled the entire truck stop. "You want to know where the edge is? The edge is waking up every morning and choosing not to destroy yourself. The edge is standing on stage in front of men who've lost everything and singing to them like they still matter. The edge is coming back from places so dark you can't even name them and still finding reasons to keep going." Jerry Lee's grin faltered slightly. "You think being wild is hard?" Johnny continued, his voice still that same quiet rasp. "Being wild is easy, Jerry Lee. It's the easiest thing in the world. You drink, you break things, you make noise, and people notice you. I know. I did it for years. But staying quiet, staying controlled when everything inside you is screaming, that's the fight. That's the real battle." The truck stop was completely silent now. "You want to talk about fire?" Johnny's eyes never left Jerry Lee's face. "I had fire. Had so much fire it nearly killed me. Burned through marriages, friendships, my own body. And you know what fire does, Jerry Lee? It destroys. Eventually it destroys the person carrying it too." Jerry Lee opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. "So yeah," Johnny said, leaning back. "I'm quiet now. Not because I got soft, because I got smart. Because I learned that the loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. Sometimes the strongest person is the one who doesn't need to prove anything anymore. Silence. Jerry Lee stared at Johnny. His grin was gone completely now. His band members looked at the floor. The truckers in the room weren't even pretending not to listen anymore. Finally, Jerry Lee laughed. But it was different this time. Quieter. Almost genuine. "Damn, Cash," he said, shaking his head. "When did you get so deep?" "When I hit bottom and realized I had to climb back up." Jerry Lee nodded slowly. For just a moment, the performance dropped. The wild energy faded. He looked like what he was, a 37-year-old man who'd spent his entire adult life being the killer and wasn't sure who he was underneath that anymore. "You ever miss it?" Jerry Lee asked quietly. "The chaos?" Johnny considered the question. "Every day." "Then why not?" "Because missing it and going back to it are different things," Johnny interrupted gently. "I can miss the fire and still choose the water. That's called survival." Jerry Lee picked up his coffee cup, stared into it for a moment, then drank. When he set it down, he looked at Johnny differently, not as competition, not as a legend to measure himself against, just as another man who'd walked through the same fire and come out the other side. "Sun Records feels like 100 years ago," Jerry Lee said. "It was a different life," Johnny agreed. "You think we made the right choices? You with your prisons and gospel and quietness, me with my chaos and fires and scandal?" Johnny was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that would stay with Jerry Lee Lewis for the rest of his life. "I think we both found ways to survive what success did to us. Your way works for you. Mine works for me. Neither is wrong. But only one of us is still standing at 2 in the morning without needing to prove we're still here." Jerry Lee absorbed that. Slowly, he nodded. He stood up from the booth, straightened his leather jacket, and for once didn't perform the movement. He just stood. His band members looked relieved. "Cash," Jerry Lee said. "Jerry Lee. Stay weird, man." Johnny's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "You too." Jerry Lee Lewis walked out of that truck stop quieter than he'd entered. His band followed. The door closed softly behind them. Through the window, Carol the waitress watched them get into a tour bus and pull back onto the highway, tail lights disappearing into the rain and darkness. She walked over to Johnny's booth and refilled his coffee without asking. "That was something," she said. "That was Jerry Lee being Jerry Lee," Johnny replied. "And you being you." "Yes, ma'am." Carol studied him for a moment. "You want anything to eat?" "No, thank you. Just the coffee." She nodded and walked away. The jukebox started playing again. The truckers returned to their pie and their conversations. The rain kept falling. And Johnny Cash sat in his corner booth, hands wrapped around his coffee, just another traveler at 2 a.m. on a Tennessee highway. But everyone in that truck stop would tell the story. They'd tell their families, their friends, anyone who'd listen, about the night Jerry Lee Lewis and Johnny Cash sat in a booth together. About how the killer came in loud and left quiet. About how the man in black never raised his voice once, but somehow won every exchange. Years later, in 1989, Jerry Lee Lewis was being interviewed for a documentary about the early days of rock and roll. The interviewer asked him about his contemporaries, about the other legends from Sun Records. "Johnny Cash," Jerry Lee said, and his usual manic energy softened slightly. "Now there's a cat who figured something out that took me a lot longer to understand." "What's that?" the interviewer asked. Jerry Lee thought about it. That you don't have to be the loudest to be heard. That real power sits quiet and waits. That the guys who survive this business aren't the ones burning brightest. They're the ones who learned when to stop burning and start building. "Did Johnny teach you that?" "Yeah," Jerry Lee nodded. "In a truck stop at 2 a.m., didn't even raise his voice. That's how I knew he meant it." The interviewer laughed, thinking it was a joke or an exaggeration. But Jerry Lee wasn't laughing. He was remembering. Johnny Cash died in 2003. Jerry Lee Lewis outlived him by nearly 2 decades. In those years, Jerry Lee would occasionally tell the truck stop story, always ending it the same way. The killer makes noise. The man in black makes you listen. Only one of those lasts. That night in the truck stop wasn't about who was tougher or wilder or more talented. It was about 2 men who'd taken different paths through the same fire. One chose to keep burning. One chose to bank the flames and let them warm instead of destroy. Neither path was wrong, but only one path led to a quiet booth at 2 a.m., drinking coffee in peace, with nothing left to prove and everything left to protect. Maybe that's the real difference between fire and strength. Fire consumes everything, including itself. Strength holds steady, even when no one's watching. The truck stop still exists, though it's been remodeled twice since 1973. The booth where Johnny sat is gone, replaced with a counter and stools. The jukebox is digital now, but the workers sometimes tell the story to travelers who look like they might appreciate it. About the night 2 legends met in the rain. About how one came in loud, and how one never needed to raise his voice at all. Have you ever confused noise for power? Everyone in that truck stop learned the difference that night. The real question is, which one are you?